Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so glad you've joined me this evening, and I've got two phenomenal stories for you tonight that you're just going to love. Before we get started, I just want to welcome my listeners all over North America, Canada and the rest of the world. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because I have got the most phenomenal letters coming through to me of quite the most extraordinary Bigfoot encounters that you truly don't want to be missing out on. And to my subscribers, I do send you loads and loads of love. You guys truly rock. My story tonight, the first one, it comes to us from Wayne. He says here, "Dear Sarah, my name is Wayne and I'm involved in wildlife conservation and rescue. It was in the early 80s that I was notified by the authorities about an escaped domesticated tiger that had been seen around the area and was causing all kinds of problems for the locals, who were very frightened about this animal. In my experience, domesticated tigers do tend to gravitate towards human beings because they tend to associate humans with easy food and play, because that's what they've always known. That's why a creature that is normally very elusive in the wild was seen by so many of the locals at the time, and they were terrified of this wild tiger harming or killing any of their children or pets. Farmers were also worried about the fate of their livestock, and so people were extremely concerned about their own personal safety. I was asked to track down this tiger and return it to the owners, because this was beyond being a police matter. The owners were absolutely devastated about their missing Bengal tiger, whom they called Molly, and they adored her. All the family interacted with the creature, and they said that she was very tame, that she would lie on the carpet next to the family when they watched television at night, and would go swimming in the pool with their teenager boy. They regarded the tiger as a member of the family that was really well loved and precious, and assured me that as long as the creature was respected, it would remain docile and affectionate. In my experience, a wild animal cannot be fully domesticated because there's always the potential of that wild, ingrained natural instinct that, if provoked unintentionally, could cause the creature to lash out and cause all kinds of damage. Worse still, if the creature was hungry, he could potentially be very, very dangerous. I cannot tell you where this happened for reasons of confidentiality in this matter. I will tell you that it was an area that was remote and rural, with thousands of square acres of natural forest, which is ideal for a tiger because they need lots of space. Ironically, these vast areas of North American wilderness were perfect for a large cat like a tiger, but not so ideal for someone tracking the creature, because it could have been almost anywhere. For me, the first port of call was to go and speak to the people who had had recent sightings of the creature. The one thing I knew was that it would gravitate toward human beings, and this gave me the strong hope that we would be able to recapture the creature quite quickly. I went to visit all the locals in the area who had seen sightings of the tiger, and so I began to get a brief idea of whereabouts the creature might be. I had been tracking animals for years, so I knew exactly what to look out for. One family who contacted me said that they had not physically seen the tiger, but had seen the brush moving in the wooded area of their land, and that they had heard the sounds of huge, massive animals scouting around that had been growling at them and letting out the most aggressive and vicious roars. I decided to search the area, despite the fact that it was much further off the beaten path than the other sightings. Armed with a rifle that I always carried for my own personal protection, I navigated the forest in the way that any tracker would. Your senses have to be sensitive about everything around you so that you can observe everything as carefully as you can. What I saw left me with more questions than answers. Before I go into my story, I just want to stress that I had never ever heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch before at the time. Remember, it was in the 80s and the hairy man had not had the exposure that he's had now. In those days, most of our information was gleaned from libraries and encyclopedias, so we did not have the knowledge so heartily available today or accessible on our World Wide Web. It was not that I was not open to the idea of such cryptic creatures existing, but it was not something that I'd ever considered or conceived of before. In truth, there are so many areas of North American wilderness that have not been explored by man, so it wouldn't be surprising at all if creatures we do not know about could exist in some of those remote areas. Nothing would surprise me. The first thing I noticed as I started studying the ground, which was fortunately quite muddy from early rainfall during the week, was that there were no tiger trail markers anywhere. I could see signs of turkey, deer, rabbits, and all kinds of other creatures, and I observed all their scat in the area, which also gave me an indication of the kind of animals that had been passing through. But there definitely had been no sighting of a tiger. Suddenly I came across a muddy area that was when I stood still, barely being able to believe what I was seeing. It was a humanoid footprint in the mud that was 16 inches long and 12 feet wide, but it was clearly not from a human or even a bear. I got a good view of the big toe area, and I could see it was too splayed out to be a human's, because humans are a lot straighter because they wear shoes, and whatever this creature was, it had never known a pair of shoes in its life. I could barely believe what I was seeing, but I shrugged it off as my intention was to find the tiger markers that I was not seeing here. I was satisfied that there were no tiger trails in the area and that people had been mistaken about the predator that they thought they had heard, as there was nothing here. Suddenly I noticed everything around me went very quiet and exceedingly still. Birds were no longer chirping, and there were no other sounds. When that happens, I know as a tracker from personal experience, it usually means that a predator is around. I stood very still for a moment in deep contemplation, and then I heard the sound of something very hefty and heavy walking through the brush. But whatever this thing was, I knew it was bipedal. It was walking on 2 legs and definitely not 4. In that moment, I knew something was there. And I've experienced this gut feeling before many times as a tracker, knowing when a dangerous predator is about. It's almost like a sixth sense of just knowing instinctively. And it's inbuilt. And it's for humans to warn them of danger, and it should never be ignored. I could sense that something was watching me, and whatever it was too close for comfort, and not being able to see it was extremely unnerving because it puts you in a position of exceeding vulnerability. Predators use this tool to take advantage of their prey. I could even smell the creature, and the smell was the most unpleasant smell that I have ever smelt in my entire life. In fact, it was so revolting that I went over to the bush to throw up. Was this smell another tool, I wondered, that the creature was using to intimidate its prey, or was it just its natural body odour? As I was speculating about all of this, I suddenly heard the most awful roar, and it was not the sound of a tiger, but something that sounded even more treacherous and deadly. I promise you that my whole body almost shut down. This creature had impacted my natural human reaction by impairing my responses. I just stood there, frozen to the spot, barely being able to breathe or move. It was like my legs had grown several tons of weight in a second, and it was difficult to maneuver my body at all. No creature before has ever incapacitated me like this. No lion, no tiger, no bear. And the effects it had on me were so destabilizing. I did not know in the world what to do. But for me, this effect literally bordered on the supernatural. And to this day, I have no rational explanation for my reaction to this creature. No other predator I have ever worked with in my entire life has affected me so profoundly, both emotionally and physically. Then I saw it rushing through the thicket at me with a mock charge. I knew it was a mock charge because I'm experienced at that kind of thing. This is common behavior in the ape species, and it's designed purposely to intimidate. I could see the creature was asserting its authority towards me and making it very clear who was boss. He was behaving this way because this was his territory. I could not believe what I was seeing because I've never seen an animal like this before. You could be forgiving for believing that this was a man dressed in a ghillie suit, but it was way too big to be a human. It was about 7 feet in height and easily 550 pounds. I would say the girth of this chest was 3.5 feet wide. The creature looked as if he did indeed possess both primate and human DNA. It had a very long, elongated skull, like many of the ancient skulls that have been recovered in the past of what some believe belonged to the Nephilim. I would not be surprised if those were the skulls from these Bigfoot creatures. It is a conical head. Its conical head sat on massive shoulders, and it had a long, hairless face with a very distinctive brow ridge and big brown eyes with a very flat nose. It also had very long arms that are a distinctive attribute of the ape species, and I knew this was the creature who had made those large footprints in the mud. There was no doubt about that in my mind whatsoever. As I stood there, I became as submissive as I could. That's what I would do if I was standing in front of a great ape. I did not challenge him, nor did I raise my rifle in his direction. Believe me, this creature was exceedingly intelligent, and he would know what my rifle was, and the last thing I wanted to do was to accelerate his anger and make him even more impulsive and reactive that could potentially be fatal for me. I appealed to the humanness in this creature, which is there, believe it or not, buried beneath all those layers of angry, volatile and reactions, and especially in this creature who was, in no doubt, an alpha male. I diverted my eyes from the creature and played a very submissive role as possible, which is what I would have done if an ape were threatening me. I walked backwards slowly, facing the creature, but looking downwards, and I do believe he calmed down almost immediately. He grunted to himself and chattered away, as if he was finally satisfied that I imposed no threat and that I wasn't going to be staying for long, and then he just walked away just like that. As you can imagine, I could not believe what I had witnessed, and I do not know what the creature was. I had heard of the abominable snowman before, and that is what I thought this creature must be, until years later I was to discover it was a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. Some might even call him the abominable snowman anyway. In my profession, there are lots of disbelievers about this creature, so I have not shared my encounter with anyone I know. But when I heard about this anonymous forum, I decided that my secret could come out of its secret box, buried away in the memory files of my mind that have been marked declassified for so long. For many of you animal lovers out there wanting to know what happened to Molly the tiger, well, I'm glad to tell you that we did finally track her down, and I think she was very happy to return to her home, where she was welcomed in with open arms by her loving owners. I would say that as lovely as this domestic tiger is, it still did have the potential to be dangerous. So I hope they survived little Molly, or rather the big tiger. I hope you and your listeners enjoyed my story. The next story is also going to be one that you're really going to love, and so let's get started. Dear Sarah, my name is Angelica and I'm from Oregon. Some may call that the heart of Bigfoot country. I grew up on a 30-acre plot of land and lived in a very basic, rudimentary cabin with my parents and 2 of my younger siblings. It was in the early 80s when I had my first Bigfoot encounter. My mother was a stay-at-home housewife who manned the fort while my dad was doing jobs for the Forestry Commission. My mother was born to be a housewife because she loved her life raising us, taking care of the livestock and attending to our every need. As far as she was concerned, family was her world, and she went beyond the call of duty to give us the best lives imaginable, and she succeeded wholeheartedly. In those days, we rarely did live off the land like a proper homestead would. My mother grew us vegetables in the garden, and we would get milk and cream from our dairy cows, eggs from our free-range chickens, honey from our bees, and my father was a great hunter, and so we were well fed with fish from our stocked lake, chickens from our farm, and wild animals that my father killed on our land, which ranged from deer, turkey to rabbits. When my dad was away on a job after some early morning homeschooling at school, my sisters and I would spend our days exploring. My mother always kept her steely eyes on our every movement. The land had been in our family since the early 1800s and was very precious to my father and was something he wanted to keep in our bloodline for generations to come. Sadly, that was not going to happen. I knew no other life than getting up in the morning very early to the early sound of the dawn chorus and to help my mother with all the household chores, which included feeding the chickens, collecting their eggs, or even hand-milking Matilda, who was my personal favourite cow. Later in the day I'd help my mother bottle preserves like strawberry jams and pickles, as well as prepare evening meals which required relentless peeling of potatoes and chopping of vegetables, the usual arduous stuff. One day we had a very unusual visitor come to our home. I do not know what her connection was to our family, but I believe her long since deceased husband had known my dad when he was a boy. This woman was one of the creepiest people I have ever met in my entire life, and if you had told me she was a witch, I would have 1,000% believed you. I think the thing that freaked me out about her the most were her yellow-brown serpent-like eyes that looked through you almost like a vulture scanning its prey from a great height. I could feel those terrible eyes devouring me with every look, and I just wanted to run and hide. "And so who is this?" said the woman, smiling at me with a toothless grin that set my nerves on edge. Why on earth did she have gums with no teeth? I wondered. Why would you go around just with gums and no teeth? It was so odd. "This is my daughter Angelica," said my mother, smiling and pushing me towards the lady as if half expecting me to give her a hug. The lady reached out to grab me with one of her sinewy, arthritic hands, but I pulled away as fast as I could. I did not want this monstrous woman to touch me. "We have got a troubled little soul here," said the lady, looking at me with a distinct look of disapproval. "Poor little mite, she's got a lot of learning to do." My father came into the room full of beams. "You remember your step-uncle Niles, who died 5 years ago," he said to me. "Well, this is his wife Trudy, and she's going to be joining us for dinner. Isn't that nice?" "Yes," I said. I was surprised to see that this strange, elderly, grey-haired, blue-rinsed lady, with her black, bedraggled, bohemian-style lacy dress that dangled over her ankles in thin petticoat layers, was having no impact on my younger siblings at all, who seemed oblivious to this woman's blatant peculiarities. The woman reached out for her black wallet-like purse, and I kid you not, pulled out a pair of dentures from a smart silver box and set them back in her mouth before she began to eat. Seeing her do this made my stomach cringe, but my mother pretended not to notice her vulgar behaviour. I mean, surely she could have put her dentures on in the bathroom. All I knew was I wanted to get away from the dinner table as fast as I could. I started playing with my roast turkey and mashed potatoes with my knife and fork like a very bored child. "Enough of that, Angelica," my father scolded. "Mind your manners, please, and stop playing with your food like that. It's very annoying." "Is she always like this, so full of nervous energy?" said the woman. "I cannot wait to read her palm. That will tell me a lot about her life purpose. I think you have an interesting one here," she said, speaking with her mouth so full that I could actually see her churning her food like a processor. It was disgusting. I grew cold with disgust. The woman really was a witch, I thought, and I was absolutely terrified of her reading my hand. Supposing she saw me with a crippling, disabling disease, or a terrible sudden accident or disaster in my future. If anything was bad in my future, I would rather not know about it, because knowing for me was far more agonizing than being happily oblivious to what the future had in store for me. I had always been more frightened by what I did not know than by what I could see. My father and mother eagerly presented their palms to the lady. Maybe they did not believe in palm reading anyway, and were just humouring her because she was our guest after all, but they seemed eager to hear what she had to say. The lady looked at my father's hand, and I could see by her dismayed, hesitant expression that something that she was seeing was not at all good. "Go on," encouraged my father. "Tell me, even if it's not what I want to hear. Am I going to be eaten by a tiger?" he teased. The woman was silent, and so quiet that you could have heard a pin drop. What, said my father, I'm really going to be eaten by a tiger? I would not joke about things like that, said the woman, looking mildly irritated by my father's futile attempts at being humorous. I am not sure you will like what I'm going to tell you, she said. Please, my father urged. I do not know if I believe in this stuff anyway, so just tell me for the hell of it. After all, it's only a bit of fun, isn't it? The woman bit her thin, cracked lips, and then paused for a long moment, and then she spoke. Your life will be cut short by a sudden disaster. I see your head. Yes, something to do with your head. I feel a thumping headache coming on. You mean like a brain aneurysm? Asked my father in horror. No, said the lady, looking at my father with heartless brown eyes. No more violent than that. Like someone causing you grievous bodily harm. Is it someone I know? Asked my dad. And how far in the future do you see this happening to me? And is there any way of stopping it? Your lifeline is cut short here, she said, pointing a crooked finger at my father's hand. Your life will come to a violent, sudden end, and it will be soon. And no, it cannot be changed, because it has already been predestined by the choices you made before your incarnation. In other words, you chose your own ending. I saw the look of total horror on my father's gentle face, and his soft blue eyes seemed to cloud over as if he was pushing back tears. I do not believe in all this reincarnation stuff, said my father. I'm a godly man. Good for you, said the lady, looking at my father with an exasperated expression on her face. I'm only telling you what I see, and I have yet to be proved wrong. You see, the hands do not lie. They're a roadmap of our life paths. My mother's face had grown as white as a sheet, and she hastily grabbed the dinner plates from the table and mumbled under her breath, I'm sure it's not true. I'm sure it's not true. I'm sure it's not true. My mother seemed less eager to present her hand to the lady, and I saw that it had become clammy and sweaty, as if she was terrified about what she might hear, but for the sake of our guest, putting up a brave front and acting like she did not believe it all anyway. It was only a bit of fun after all. Oh, I see a long life here, said the lady. I see you chose a very easy incarnation for yourself. You clearly are a very young, inexperienced soul. I do see a few health problems along your journey, something to do with your blood pressure, but on the whole, a good long life. But your ticker will finally get the better of you, but not until you're really old. My mother looked relieved and pushed my hand forward. Your turn, Angelica. Let's see what the future has in store for you. My heart started to race at 1,000 miles an hour. I was utterly terrified, and the fear I felt caused me to bolt out of the house like an unbridled, rebellious horse, and I literally galloped out of that cabin at 100 miles an hour. I felt as if I was running for my life and being pursued by a malicious predator, and I just continued to run and run and run. I could see that the horrible woman in my mind turning into a hideous demonic creature with long wings hunting me down like a massive hawk and revealing to me the things I just didn't want to know. Bear in mind that my family lived on a large plot. We're talking about a vast acreage of rambling natural vegetation and ubiquitous trees that had not been tended to for years, as my father's job for the Forestry Commission meant that he had left our hand to its own natural devices. It had become a wilderness that over the years had attracted some of the healthiest looking wildlife that you have ever seen. We had huge deer on our land, and I even saw giant turkeys that they were so big they could have been on the Guinness Book of Records. Some of our property was so remarkably overgrown that the only paths you could see were made by the deer, and these pathways were narrow and relatively low. So I was surprised to find some new pathways that were 8 feet wide and 10 feet high, and they were all over the place. It was almost as if my father had decided to clear away some of the dense thicket that was full of nasty thorns and barbs, to clear away for better hunting opportunities. But since when had he had time to do such a thing, I wondered. For a moment, curiosity got the better of me, and I began to forget why I was here in the first place. The sheer terror I had experienced in the presence of that vile woman had finally left me. Even if she had seen a short life for my dad, Why had she told him something quite so foreboding and so nonsensical? Why had she been so heartless and so insensitive? The thought of losing my father to a sudden disaster brought tears to my eyes, and I was surprised to find that I really was crying. I could taste the saltiness of my tears. I knew I wasn't supposed to wonder about the wild areas of our land without supervision from an adult, because there are a lot of wild animals here that my father had spotted from time to time, like bobcats, cougars, coyotes, mountain lions, and even a black panther. Yes, I knew I was not 100% safe out here in the wilderness part of our land, but being away from that nasty witch brought a sense of peace and serenity to my being. Come what may, that predator would never get to read my palm, and if it meant spending a week in this rambling undergrowth, well then so be it. It was worth my while. I decided to follow a big path that had been made in the dense undergrowth, and one of them led to an open clearing with a beautiful stream. It was like I had found a magical secret spot all of my own, a real treasure to be sure, just like the secret garden. I felt this rush of childlike, whimsical delight and pleasure overwhelm my senses. I tore off my shoes and dangled my feet in the water, enjoying the fresh cold wetness on my skin. I surveyed the beauty of my environment and wondered why I had never seen this part of the valley before, when I had been exploring with my dad. I could see the blue-purple silhouettes of the tall mountains standing proudly against the azure blue sky, dotted with white fluffy clouds. There were large regal-looking eagles with massive wingspans soaring majestically across the sky, and I could hear the sounds of pretty bird calls in the valley, and watched in delight as a mother doe with her fawn came to drink at the stream. I saw her watching me, but she didn't seem overly concerned by me, and continued to drink very thirstily. I did not know how long I spent in this open clearing, overlooking the glorious green hilly valleys. I had long since forgotten about my parents, who were probably wondering where I was by now, but I really didn't care. I had found this secret, enchanting spot in nature. Besides, it felt great to be away from that witch. I lay back on this warm, sunny rock that was a part of a rocky outcrop that surrounded the beautiful, gushing, pebbling stream with its clear, sparkling water and white, pretty, bubbling foam. I cradled my head in my arms and fell into a deep sleep. As I started to awaken, I could hear this excited chattering sound of two people having a fast conversation in a foreign tongue, and I got the impression that they were talking about me. It sounded like that. I was still in a dreamy state of being half asleep and half awake. I was sure I must be hallucinating or seeing things, because as I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I saw two little creatures standing before me. When I say little, I don't mean little in terms of the physical sense, but I mean you could sense they were young, they were juveniles, in age, of about 4 foot tall. But I really had never seen anything like them before. I could sense their young, excitable energy. They were studying me with an open fascination, as if I was something so unusual and so out of place. The one creature reached out with a big, hairy hand and touched my skin, almost as if he was comparing my skin to his own. His expression was one of enthused awe, as if he was marvelling me like you would a great work of art. And by the way he or she was looking at me, I must have been like a Michelangelo masterpiece to them. They both appeared to find me absolutely fascinating, but the feeling was mutual, because I was equally astonished by what I was seeing. I had never seen creatures like this before, and I did not know that creatures like this even existed in North America. If they did, no one had ever told me about them before. Not my parents, not science books, not anything. I reached out and touched the creature's hairless face, and marvelled at how velvety and smooth the skin was. The creature had warm brown eyes that were friendly and inquisitive, had a prominent forehead, a flat nose, and thin lips. The only thing I can say about the creatures were that they were definitely primates, but they were also very definitely human, and I think it was that humanness that we identified in each other that made us relatable. Even though I did not understand what the creatures were saying, they would mimic their intentions, and their acting was brilliant. I could almost understand them, even though no words were spoken between us. Suddenly both of the creatures looked in the distance, as if they could sense someone was coming, and then they hid me behind a large tree trunk and made gestures for me to stay quiet. I felt as if they were hiding me for someone they knew would not be pleased to see me. Suddenly I noticed everything in the valley went very still and quiet, and then I heard this heavy sound, rather like a really stocky bull walking through the undergrowth. Standing there I saw this massive creature, which must have been the creature's mother, because she was 8 feet tall, 800 pounds, and had a pair of dangling breasts that had lost their elasticity due to gravity. The creature was covered with brown cinnamon hair, with red tufts growing through. Her hair was smooth and long, and it shone in the midday sun like a healthy head of hair would. The mother had a very obvious cone-shaped head, which was not as blatantly apparent on her youngsters, and she had virtually no neck, and the hugest shoulders and the smoothest face I've ever seen. Her body was long and lanky, her legs slim and muscular, her arms and chest were enormous, like a first-class athlete that performs in major marathons. The creature was agile, strong, and incredibly muscular. I was glad to be hiding from her, because her sheer size intimidated me, and a one-on-one encounter would have been very frightening for me. She continued to chatter with her kids for quite a time, and in my opinion they were speaking a very clear primate language. Suddenly I could hear the sound of human voices in the valley. "She could be around here," I heard one man say. I could hear my mother crying out in dismay, "Angelica, Angelica, Angelica, where are you?" I realized that my mother had called out a search party with all the locals, and they were looking for me. I have never seen creatures react as fast to human voices as these creatures did. I watched the juveniles jump onto their mother's back with the agility of a monkey, and they scurried up the foliage of a large tree where they seemed to squirrel themselves to the top of the large canopy and almost become one with the green leaves at the very top of the tree. I do not believe you would have spotted them in plain sight. That was how invisible they became. The mother herself seemed to blend into the scenery, and even though I knew she was hiding, I actually could not see her. It was like she had vanished and disappeared. Suddenly I saw my mother, and she looked so frantic and hot and bothered that I ran out of my hiding space to comfort her. "Oh, Angelica," my mother cried, "why did you run off like that? We've been so awfully worried about you. Something quite dreadful could have happened to you. Have I not warned you about cougars and mountain lions before?" My mother was more happy to see me than she was angry with me. I told her that that witch-like woman had scared me half to death, and she did seem to understand. "We had to be nice to her," said my mother. "She was our guest, you see." "But what about all the horrible stuff she said about Daddy? It was so cruel, it was so unkind." "I don't think she intended to be mean, darling. It's just what she claims to have seen in your dad's hands, that's all." "But it's not true, Mummy, is it?" I asked. "I don't want Daddy to die like that," I said. "Of course it's not true," said my mother, taking me into her arms and cradling me. "Is that why you ran away? You didn't want her to look at your hand?" I nodded. "I don't want her saying horrible stuff to me like she did to Daddy." "Of course not," said my mother. "But she's gone now. Do you know what she called you? She said you had an eagle spirit." "What's that?" I asked. "The soul of a truth seeker, someone who wants to find answers to life's many mysteries. Well, that's what she said to us anyway." It was not long after meeting that witch-like woman that her prediction came true about my father. He was in a restaurant one day with some members of the Forestry Commission, including their wives, so my mother was there too. There was a shootout at the restaurant involving the 4 robbers. One woman in the restaurant fainted in terror when the robbers demanded that everybody in the restaurant open their wallets and hand over their jewelry. My father rushed to this lady's aid, and one of the ladies shot both my dad and the lady at point-blank range, and they were killed instantly. After my father's untimely demise, my mother sold our land against the wishes of my father. I think he would have understood, though, why she needed to let go of the place that held so many beautiful memories for her, which were haunting reminders of her dreadful loss. We finally sold up and moved to Boston, where my mother became a head baker for a local cake shop. My mother never married again, but she did develop high blood pressure, but is still going strong at 80 years old. All these years later, I think about my encounters with the two young creatures, which I now know to be Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It was only by chance I discovered a program that talked about these creatures as being elusive and impossible to find. I do believe that to be true, because they do know how to blend in with their environment, and I think they do that for survival. I would not mind betting that people have directly looked at a Sasquatch in plain sight and never seen it, even if it was yards away or in touching distance. Nothing would surprise me about those creatures. Well, thank you so much for that lovely story. I really loved it, and I'm sure my listeners did too. Goodbye and good night until next time.